I'm Jean Gray, publisher of American Entrepreneurship Today and host of the podcast series Experience Voices, where I talk with highly accomplished people who share the critical elements that led to their success. While robots and robotics are hot now, our guest on Experience Voices is Bill Santana Li, who in 2013 had to work extraordinarily hard to gain his seed funding round. Hear how he went on to raise $120 million for his startup Nightscope that was founded to develop and build robots to address our country's high crime rates and vulnerability to terrorism. Bill's story reflects the passion and perseverance that is demanded of entrepreneurs to achieve success. Listeners will appreciate Bill's frankness about fundraising and his unconventional mindset that has enabled him to prevail as a true visionary entrepreneur. Thank you for being a guest on Experience Voices, Bill.
Greetings from Silicon Valley. Thanks for having us.
So let's start with Nightscope and tell me a bit about the product line and your target customers.
Well, I'd really like to start with the long-term vision. So we have this grandiose vision to see if we can make the United States of America the safest country in the world. And the idea here is to combine four really complicated technologies into one to build these autonomous security robots that we have patrolling across the country. It's a combination of autonomy, robotics, AI, and electric vehicle technology to have these machines be able to give officers and guards an ability to have really smart eyes and ears and their voice on the ground in multiple locations at the same time.
So who's your target customers?
Target clients are very simply wherever you might see an officer or guard patrolling. So a lot of our clients are commercial real estate, corporate campuses, law enforcement agencies, schools, retail establishments, manufacturing facilities, logistics facilities, train stations, pretty much all over the country.
And you've been in business for a while, so are you geographically dispersed around the country or in specific cities?
We're all over the country. We've now operated, well north of 2.5 million hours out in the field. And I've lost track, I think 6, 7, 8 summers and winters. And yeah, we've anything from working through unique conditions in Hawaii or Puerto Rico to dealing with lots of fog in Kentucky or dealing with stuff in Houston, polar vortexes in Minnesota to being in the desert in the, parts of Nevada. So we've kind of seen a lot.
So when we talk about robots, are your robots engaged with an individual or are they positioned somewhere in an environment?
They patrol large spaces, large public spaces, I should say. So they could be patrolling a community for an apartment complex, or it could be in a, outdoor mall or something like that. And so they are geo-fenced or, patrolling in that particular area, and they do come upon individuals. So I guess both.
So in the time frame since that you've started, are you at an inflection point where you're seeing accelerated growth and more acceptance of the robots?
Oh, yes. The rise of the robots is real. Let's see, 2021, we did about 3.4 million in top line revenue. Last year, we did about 5.6 million. This year, we're hoping to close, or we're at a $13 million annual run rate. So we are double-digit growth across the board.
So let's step back a little bit, and then we will discuss more about how you do funding. You started at Ford, and I read some of your really significant accomplishments at Greenleaf. So can you share a little bit about how your career at Ford positioned you for an entrepreneurial career?
Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I used to live in Detroit and work at Ford Motor Company, which was an unbelievable training ground. I spent a decade there, I think 12 different jobs, 4 different continents, every functional area. And I got to literally see the world and, anything from manufacturing rationalization to product development through concept design, market research, mergers and acquisitions. And it really was an awesome training ground. Grateful. And, there's a lot of stuff. I have a love-hate relationship with the auto industry. There's a few things that I really miss, but overall, to answer your question, it was a wonderful training ground because I view what we're doing at Nightscope. In some ways, it's like much easier car to build. In a lot of ways, it's an order of magnitude more difficult.
So, where did the opportunity come from to be the founder of Greenleaf or part of the team for Greenleaf?
So there was some legislation pending or in process where the automakers were about to be required to take their vehicles back at the end of life to literally recycle. So we were looking at different growth opportunities and profitable growth and how can we be more environmentally thoughtful. So I ran around, I did 23 executive reviews, 6 months trying to convince the company and every facet that we should try to build a automotive parts recycling subsidiary. By some miracle, I was able to do it and got the board to release $250 million to me to do a roll up in the used parts industry. So if the audience doesn't know what a roll up is, it's basically you buy the same thing over and over again, make one big one. So I bought 22 companies in 11 months, which is a daunting task. And about 600 employees, doing about 150 million in sales, and had built the world's second largest automotive recycler. And after a bunch of subsequent transactions, it ended up being part of LKQ, which trades on NASDAQ and based in Chicago. I think they're somewhere in the $10 to $15 billion range now. So the investment thesis was correct.
So once that venture, and I wouldn't say put to bed, but well established, and the initial challenge was overcome, how did that lead to your next ventures?
That gave me the entrepreneurial bug. I mean, I was 28. I was the youngest senior exec at Ford. I had my own board, my own treasury, my own HR, my own everything, and it was like, wow, this could be a lot of interesting, value creation. And then I got lured out to Silicon Valley to kind of start, I guess, my full-time entrepreneurial career. Being an entrepreneur is be ill-advised. Trying to build a company inside of a company has a lot of pros and there's a long list of cons. So I wanted to give it a shot out in the quote unquote real world, which is vastly different. I used to lose $500 million or $1 billion in rounding, and $1 billion in the real world is kind of a lot of money. So it was an interesting journey, but kind of fast forward to Nightscope, we started the company in April of 13 with this grandiose mission that I mentioned, and we got beat on for months, almost a year, of everyone telling us no, 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 this is a dumb idea, it'll never work. And so we had to choose a different path to finance the company, but at least we got it done. And a decade later, we're an overnight sensation of continuing to grow robots, changing the world one robot at a time. Well, now a lot more than one robot at a time, but yeah.
So you went through multiple ventures, and I saw in the notes that you secured funding almost regularly for each of the ventures that you were undertaking. So taking sort of the mindset of someone as an entrepreneur who knows how to get funding, what is that mindset? Because most first time entrepreneurs, it's really quite daunting and it's quite foggy what they're doing. So how did you sort of develop this skill set that has worked for you continuously from venture to venture?
I think I will first say that the capital formation process in the US is broken. I mean, there's $100, $200 billion goes into startups every year, and it's a god awful process. The capital allocation process and those who allocate have skewed incentives. The structure's messed up. There should be a couple hundred Elon Musks, not one of them. And there's a lot of innovation being funded to disrupt financial services, healthcare, every part of our society, but no one's disrupted the capital formation and funding process. And there's a lot of dry capital kind of sitting on the sidelines and a bunch of entrepreneurs needing capital. And this is a massive failure on the entire establishment. But to answer your particular question, one of the important things to do, I think, for entrepreneurs is not always just focus on product market fit, making sure I have the right product for the right market, but spending a little bit of time on capital to company fit. What is the type of money that you need for what you're trying to do? Not all money is the same shade of green, and you need to think about what is it that you really need. I think, for example, let's use a positive example. If Mark Zuckerberg retired from Facebook and was bored out of his mind, and five of his buddies were sitting around a table, they decided to start a fund, and you decided to start a new social media company, and you needed capital, you should go try to strike a deal with Mark and get a term sheet, give him one or two board seats, and kind of be done with it, right? They probably could be extremely valuable in guiding and helping and opening doors and everything else. But I think that 100, 200 billion that I mentioned, and these numbers I'm going to give you are probably off a bit, but roughly speaking, 80% of that money goes into software related stuff, 10% into biotech, and then 10% into other. Frankly, that's not how a multi-trillion-dollar economy works. And you've got folks that don't have the requisite skills trying to fund or not funding outright things that could move society forward, right? I'm trying to make up a dumb example. I want to come up with this new steam engine locomotive, right? There aren't like 50 venture capitalists sitting around thinking about the next steam engine locomotive, right? And that it's almost the entire part of the economy is not covered because they're looking for the fastest returns, and the fastest returns with the least amount of capital is typically around software. And I don't understand when in our country's history that we decide to like go work on the easy stuff. And so, I've unfortunately, I'm not proud of this, but I've probably done more financial engineering than actual engineering to get some of the stuff financed. So yeah, I've gone down the corporate venture capital route, done all kinds of every flavor of debt. I've done, venture VC funding, I hate the term equity crowdfunding, but there's a ton of mechanisms and you just need to figure out what is the right type of capital for what you're trying to accomplish.
So you're saying that the capital formation is broken, and it sounds like so much of it is concentrated in software. But you're working in a company that I guess is very hardware based, but you need software as well. So where did you go in some of your initial attempts for Nightscope? Were there people out in Silicon Valley that were open to a robot that would be used for crime prevention?
In 2013, not so much. I mean, live in Silicon Valley, running around up and down Sand Hill Road trying to get somebody to write a check. And all we got was no, 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 and no. And it took me 364 days to just raise the seed round, which just was $1 million or $1.5 million just to build the first prototype. And it was a kind of miserable process. And you would have thought like, oh, Sandy Hook just occurred. Robotics is going to be a growing part of the sector. It's obviously deep technology and it's going to be for the good of the country. Like there should be some easy dollars to go get this thing done, and was not possible. So I had made a commitment to myself. I was born in New York City. Someone hit my town on 9/11. I'm still really angry about it. And so I promised myself that I'd spend the rest of my life better securing our country. And so the answer from all these venture capitalists was the wrong answer. So I wasn't going to accept that, I'm going to be blocked from doing what needs to get done. So ended up just raising the capital myself. I'm kind of playing investment banker, never accepted a term sheet, just wrote the term sheets and said, here's the price, take it or leave it. If you don't like it, I'll go find some other investor, and just ran around. And after doing that for a while, just before the public listing in a couple of years ago, we had raised, north of $120 million from 35,000 investors. which is a grueling process. But, there's a few positive things that came from it, just not just, the capital, which was sorely needed and still needed to continue to grow the company. But it was also important to, if we're going to change the country's perspective on how to reimagine public safety, frankly, you're not going to do that with three institutional investors in some ivory tower somewhere in the corner. Like, you're going to need, frankly, society engaged. And we've met so many people across the country through that process. And this is, there's some people on Wall Street that look down on what we did. It's like, okay, well, who invested? Well, it's judges, it's mayors, it's, former NYPD detectives, it's CIA, FBI, DHS, it's students, it's bus drivers, it's mom and dad, and everyone in between. And we had a very good cross section of America wanting to change and continue to want to redefine how public safety is done, because obviously it's broken. And if I had a chance to do it again, I'd probably do the same thing again, because you're not going to be able to change a problem that has plagued the country for 200 years. And as I often say, we're in our 46th president and no one's fixed the $2 trillion negative economic impact of crime and terrorism on our country. And so to think that a few entrepreneurs and some money is just going to magically get everything to work all of a sudden, it's not going to happen. So this is a long-term play, but I think people realize now that we've put more than 10 years into us that we're not kidding around and we're not going anywhere. We're going to force a victory.
When you raise $120 million, and I guess you're going back down 2013 or so, I think, out of curiosity, where does $120 million go as far as where you were in developing your initial concepts and to actually getting to market?
Remember, it's $120 million over 9 years. So relatively speaking, especially from where I came from in Detroit, it's not a lot of money for what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So where did the money go? Well, when we ran around starting to raise the capital, we didn't have an office, we didn't have a brand, we didn't have any technology, we didn't have any clients, we didn't have anything. So it went into, renting, leasing out facilities, including hiring, a full team of manufacturing folks, engineers, accountants, salespeople, and everything in between. Then developing all that technology. So we design everything, we engineer it, we physically build all the machines, we deploy them and support them across the country. So all that money went into developing the technology and getting it launched across the country.
Can you share a little bit about how you went about doing it? Is it considered an IPO, a public equity offering? How would you describe the funding?
For that piece of it, there's a term, it's to me somewhat insulting and nonsensical, but I guess the normal term uses equity crowdfunding or whatever. And to me, it's a ridiculous term, because, if you're working at Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley and someone, an issuer works with you to paper up an S1 to do a normal IPO or initial public offering, what do Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley do? Well, they run around to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that they know to get every institution, family office, and part of the retail to buy shares in this company. That sounds a lot like crowdfunding. You're just basically going out, getting everybody to buy. But somehow, if a company decides to use the same mechanism, basically, or analogous, to get the capital that they need to grow their company, somehow that's looked down upon. And I have a humongous problem with that, because, less than 1% of the companies actually get any venture funding, right? And, in a lot of cases, venture funding is viewed as, the smart money. And in a lot of cases, frankly, it's not. It's like, if you're a venture capitalist, your business model is literally to be wrong 9 times out of 10, which is fine. But, don't walk around with an attitude like you're right 9 times out of 10. And, for the 1% of the companies that do get venture funding, 95% of startups fail, right? So what happens to the other 99% of those entrepreneurs that could have made a huge difference. And just because they didn't know how to network themselves through Silicon Valley, they didn't have the right and I'm going to say something not pleasant here, if they're not of the correct gender or race or height or age in their life, they don't get the funding that's needed. You can't tell me that the capital formation process in the US for startups is, bright. It's not. It's very much broken. And I think there's a way to improve things, but you have to have some sense of leadership, and part of leadership is just finding a new way.
So given what you just shared, one or two pieces of advice for the entrepreneur who would take the crowdfunding route for their company?
I think in general, two pieces of advice is you better, whatever you're working on, you better pick something that you're irrationally in love with. You will fight to the very end to make happen. And it cannot be a passing fad or, oh, I would love what seems like a glamorous life of working at a startup, or it's some ego thing or whatever. Whatever that thing that you want funded is going to be in the best interest of society, and you're willing to go to the mat, then that's the thing you should work on. I think. And then the second thing is, if you want to go down that kind of different fundraising route, you need to learn that it's a second job. You have now two jobs and no one cares. You have your first job is to build the company that you're building. And then your second job is to go raise this money. And you need to think about it as if you were selling a new product. You have to design it, you have to engineer it, you have to price it, you have to service it, you have to market it, you have to take care of the whole thing as if it was a brand new separate company. And no one's gonna care that you're putting in 120 hours a week to make this thing all work, because you have to do both. And so if it's that amount of effort, you better pick something that you're willing to go to the mat for, because it's going to be hard.
Was a particular crowdfunding platform teed up, or did you evaluate or connect with more than one to choose the vehicle that you felt had the best fit?
The legislation really didn't go into effect in earnest till 2015. I mean, it's almost a decade later, and it's still new. There are multiple. We use probably have used 3 or more broker dealers. They have their pros and cons. In a lot of cases, they're startups unto themselves, so beware. Second, they evolve and change, and they're all the same, and depends on what you're trying to do, right? If you're trying to raise a certain amount for a certain subject, it might be a perfect fit for some of them, and some probably a non-starter. So you need to do your homework, and you need to find the latest information on each, and do your diligence.
So let's talk a little bit about the 10 million public safety infrastructure bond. That is it recently closed, or is the offering still open? Share a little bit about that.
Sure, with the caveat that hopefully you'll put in the notes here that all the offering circular and the disclaimers and all that good stuff are at bond.knightscope.com. But we actually recently just launched this. So the public safety infrastructure bond offering is intended to raise non-dilutive growth capital for Knightscope to continue to grow and put more people to work. We've got north of a $4 million backlog of new orders, and we need to hire more people, and we need to get more sales folks, and we need to kind of continue to grow. And you can't grow without that additional capital. So uniquely, we're actually using that same Reg A plus Tier 2 regulatory framework to raise this offering. So most people won't know this, but if you're a publicly traded company and you wanted to go raise some capital, there are some not very nice people running around trying to get, have you sell a massive amount of equity or sell you some really toxic, nasty debt. And there's maybe, I don't know, 200, 300, 400 debt providers that prey on small cap companies that, less than, let's say, a billion or less than $500 million in market cap, with some outrageous, bordering and crossing the line financial structures that are highly, highly lucrative for those hedge funds and bankers, and very punitive and pretty damaging for the issuers. So we decided to, frankly, rather pay our investors and supporters than pay some Wall Street insiders and a Wall Street elite. So if you're a publicly traded company and want to go, raise that kind of money, it usually is from Wall Street itself, and retail investors would never, or not that we know of, have access to high yield debt offerings by a public issuer. So we decided to create this bond, and it works pretty simple. It's we're raising $10 million from retail investors and our supporters, and you can earn 10% interest annually, and it's a 5-year bond. So just a simple example, if you invested $10,000, we would pay you $1,000 in cash for the interest per year. So every year we'll send you a check for $1,000, and then at the end of the 5 years or at maturity, we would return your original principal of $10,000. So you started with 10 grand and now you have 15,000. Most retail investors would never have access to, 10% interest, right? Most folks are not in some, they're not a limited partner in some hedge fund somewhere and don't have access to these kinds of insider returns from Wall Street. And so we thought we could, help our existing shareholders, because this is non-dilutive capital, provide a lucrative return on investment for those that want to participate, and then give Knightscope the capital it needs to grow. So try to fix a bunch of things at one time.
So you take on the challenge or the task of promoting this bond to the general public?
Yep. So that's on us to let people, not only let people know, but educate, because a lot of folks are like, we can do what? Yeah,
Right.
You can go to bond.knightscope.com, you can click the button, and you can, on a credit card or on a ACH wire transfer, start earning interest. And we do closings every month. So you start earning interest upon the closing of your bond, not the closing of the entire transaction, which most Reg A stuff, takes multiple months. So as I like to say, it's in your interest to earn interest. So whenever you're wanting to learn more, you can go check it out.
So over the course of your ventures, which have navigated, venture capital and the bond that you just described and the crowdfunding platform, did you have a CFO person that you grew with or partnered with who expanded your skill set from what you had at Ford? I mean, because this is a lot for an individual listening to you to say, over a 10-year, 15-year period, how many different creative ways that you were able to move your ventures forward in dealing with funding.
I've had, I don't know, over the course of my life, probably half a dozen CFOs, but I've been the one, unfortunately, in charge of the capital formation process. So I've, obviously had help with way too many attorneys and way too many accountants and way too many finance people. But those are things that, I set my mind to wanting to get something done. I will do whatever it takes to get it done, so long as it's legal, ethical, and moral. I'm gonna push, and I'm gonna push until we get what we want completed. And what was stopping my team was not having enough capital. So we got to go figure it out. And I kind of view it as any good entrepreneur would, any problem. Like, these jobs are horrifying. I mean, if you want to be the founder of a company, like, you probably have a screw loose. You're going to get, what you're going to have for breakfast is getting punched in the face. Then for lunch, you're going to get punched in the stomach. And then you're going to get body slammed for dinner. And then you got to wake up the next morning and be all smiley and talk to the next person who wants to have an interview with you, and everything's fine. But to me, a good entrepreneur just sees a problem and it's like, okay, another problem. How am I going to solve it? And you just keep looking until you either can concoct a new way to do something. But yeah, unfortunately, and I get pinged, almost every day, or it feels like every day, from a founder wanting to understand how we did what we did. And I can often try to provide some advice. Got invited to join the intro folks, so I think it's intro.co/W Santana Li. If you want to book some time with me, I can spend probably for later stage companies that have some complications and stuff. I can try to help on nights and weekends when I do have nights and weekends, but it's a little taxing. But yeah, unfortunately, I've had to do a lot of this myself with a lot of support from the team. But all the fundraising has been on my shoulders, and I've hired. Not proud to say this. I've hired. It feels like a boutique bank, a single person, a small firm, a medium firm, a large firm, an extra large firm, or extra large firm, and every single time the bankers have failed. And I've had to end up, I guess, de facto becoming the investment banker.
So I guess my last question would be: is in your journeys and being in going into really different industries, I mean, all tech, how did you recruit and retain the people that really were core to get through the early days? Was this you when you were at Ford? It was, I guess, there was a lot of internal resources, but once you left Ford, you were a little bit more on your own and having to recruit. Share a little bit about the mindset of getting that first 2 or 3 people who buy into the vision.
I mean, it's a huge challenge. I've been very lucky. The initial management team that started Nightscope is literally, we're coming up this April, will be our 11th year anniversary, and the same 4 people are still at it. So we're some relentless,
You're doing
stubborn,
something right there. Now, come on, you have to admit you're doing something
relentless,
right.
stubborn people. And some of the people on the team I've worked with since 1999 or 2000, and have long-standing relationships. I don't know. I think recruiting is really hard, to be frank with you. You can, on an interview, you spend an hour with somebody or 3 hours or whatever, like, you're never going to know who's for real. And the person that you thought was this person will never, ever falter. They can be trusted and everything else. It turns out not to be the case. And then the person, like, yeah, that person's not going to make it, but let's hire him or her and see how they do. And then the proverbial stuff hits the fan, and they're the ones that are there to fix the problems. Will do whatever it takes. Will jump on the grenade and continue to fight and keep going. And then only after you're in, probably a different way to say it, only until you're in battle for a year, 2 or 3, and do you really know the makeup of someone. And we've had a lot of stability at Nightscope with one of our VPs just celebrated his 7th year with us, and he's been through hell and back. But there's been a good amount of turnover too, because some people are like, oh wow, this is kind of a lot harder than I expected, or I don't know how to do this, or I can't handle the volatility. And some people can't make it, or we got them at the wrong time in their career. But I think probably to answer your question a little bit more succinctly would be, you got to paint the picture of what you're trying to do that's so large and so inspiring that you can get some of the brightest to want to come help. Like, it's kind of, I mean, I know it still sounds crazy 10 years later, like, we're going to make the US the safest country in the world. And I was like, you want to do what? Yeah, that's kind of the end goal. And some people just chuckle or roll their eyes and go, this dude's a freaking lunatic. Or some people are like, yeah, let's go try it. And at least we have the honor and privilege to wake up every morning in Silicon Valley to know that we're making a difference and not arguing about the problem. And then and especially for technical folks, if you end up telling them like, hey, this is really hard, no one's ever in the history of mankind done this before, that can also motivate people, right? So it's the technical challenge, it's the overarching theme, but you also don't want to baby people through the process. Like, listen, if you can't handle it, you probably shouldn't be on the team. And, some of those end gracefully and fine, and sometimes not.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have a great vision, and it's very appealing given the challenge the country faces. So I appreciate your time in coming on Experience Voices and winding us through your ventures over the years and what's coming up for Nightscope in the future. So I thank you again for your time.
I appreciate that. And if folks want to learn more about Nightscope, we've got everything laid out really in a really simple format. Just go to nightscope.com/rise, RISE, and you can learn more about the rise of the robots. And thank you for having us. And as I often say, long Nightscope and short the criminals.
The Nightscope bond offering referred to in the Experience Voices podcast may not be suitable for all investors. We suggest those who are interested seek advice from an independent financial advisor. You have been listening to the podcast series Experience Voices. To hear more and subscribe, visit AmericanEntrepreneurship.com/podcast, where you will also find a form for listener feedback.